Thank you so much, all of you, for being here this evening. This is a wonderful, wonderful turnout, and I'm thrilled to have you all here tonight. For those of you I don't know and have not met, I'm Dr. Dan Lesham, the director of this center, and thank you. I have one fan. I've arrived. So, no, I'm kidding. Wow, that seemed like a shameless fishing for applause there. I apologize. Exactly. So it's really wonderful because we generally here have events either with community or with students, and I'm thrilled to see a completely intermingled audience. So feel free to introduce yourself to your neighbors. This is a wonderful opportunity. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I just wanted to do a few housekeepings, and those are to start with the thank yous. As those of you who come regularly to our events will know, this lecture is one of 3 in this semester's Drs. Bebe and Owen Bernstein lecture series. We are honored and so humbled to have Bebe's continued support for these types of lectures, and we've explored so many interesting topics, and it really allows us to bring really top-level scholars. And for anyone in this room who didn't come in familiar with our speaker, I promise you will want to read more after tonight's lecture. I also want to thank all the members of the KHRCA of this center who help make the programming possible. As many of you might know, all of the money to offer lectures and films and events, reception, all of it comes from the support of our community. Tonight, as at other lectures, we have one of our administrative coordinators, Allison, who's walking around with a little iPad, and she can take donations, small, up to whatever you like, but even a couple dollars helps make sure that we can continue having these types of programs. So we appreciate all of you who can support us. This is also the second of 3 lectures that we're having on the topic of our exhibit that opened a few weeks ago, Producing Silence, Hollywood, the Holocaust, and the Jews. For those of you who haven't yet, please feel free to grab a catalog for the exhibit at the end of the evening and come back and take a look at it, and we'll be happy to talk you through it. There are a couple seats in the front row. If you come in late, you take what you get. He's gonna risk it. Oh, he's already got a seat. Yes, absolutely. So we're having another lecture on April 7th in this film series, and of course we're having film screenings. We're showing 4 of the films from the exhibit here in this room. We've already screened the first, All Quiet on the Western Front, but we have the other events coming up, and if you don't have one, you can get one of our spring semester catalogs that will give you all the dates. All right, so for tonight's lecture, we are honored to have Dr. Annette Insdorf, who is a professor in the graduate film program of Columbia School of the Arts, and has served as the director of the undergraduate film studies for 27 years, which is amazing. Important to start by saying that she's a graduate of Queens College, CUNY. So we all know, how important the place we're in and the work that this college does along with the other CUNY colleges, and how much at risk the future of this and other CUNY colleges is right now in the state budget. And so, on a separate note, if you'd like to help us out by writing letters, come to me after and I'll give you the address to advocate on our behalf with the governor. But back to our speaker. Dr. Insdorf has written many innovative and authoritative books on a variety of topics related to film, and 1 or 2 that also relate to the Holocaust, primarily her second book, Indelible Shadows, Film in the Holocaust, which is a real landmark in the study, and really walks through mostly questions of how the Holocaust has been represented in film. It's really the textbook that's used across the country in film classes. Dr. Insdorf was born in Paris and moved to New York, where she received her BA from Queen's and later her Ph.D. from Yale as a Danforth Fellow. In 1986, she was named Chevalier dans l'ordre des arts et des lettres by the French Ministry of Culture. A second honor arrived in 1993 when she was knighted for her educational efforts. So you can refer to her as Knight Dr. Insdorf. And a third in 1999 when she was promoted to Officer in the Arts. I couldn't really read you all of her honors and accolades, but let me not take any more of your time with preface, and let me turn it over to Dr. Insdorf.
Good evening. And I know I'm sort of tiny, so I may end up moving over here. You may have better access, or here, I don't know. Oh, that one? Okay, this is a little better. You can see me all right?
And then you have your mouse up here.
Yeah, I need a... Oh, wait, if you do that, will I be able to see my clips?
Yeah, it's just a little...
Oh, okay.
Tinted.
Perfect.
And you can put your notes on.
That's all right. Well, as I'm sure many of you know, the number of motion pictures about the Holocaust keeps growing, to the extent that I almost feel you could call movies about the Shoah a genre the way Westerns or musical comedies are a genre, a type of film that even has subcategories. And for me, it goes back pretty much to 1979 when I was living in Paris, seeing movies daily and realizing that a growing number already then had been made about World War II and its darker aspects. I devoted myself to this phenomenon, and the book became Indelible Shadows, first published in 1983, basically as the daughter of Jewish, Polish Holocaust survivors. I wanted to bring relatively unknown foreign films to the foreground and also to assess how American movies had dealt with the legacy of the Nazis' war against the Jews. The word Holocaust was just coming into common usage, thanks primarily to the NBC Holocaust miniseries of 1978. Had someone told me that by the year 2016, films about the Jewish victimization, about the Nazi era, would be commercially non-taboo, consistent Oscar winners, and part of a cultural embracing of the Shoah, I would not have believed it. But if the Oscars a few weeks ago are any indication, the awarding of Best Foreign Language Film to Hungary's Son of Saul affirms the enduring dramatic appeal of the subject. Similarly, 1 year earlier, the same prize was bestowed on the Polish film Ida. In both cases, the directors Laszlo Nemes and Paweł Pawlikowski, respectively, found new cinematic ways to represent, respectfully, both the immediacy and the continuing shadow of wartime horror. The Holocaust continues to be a magnet for the imagination of American filmmakers as well, as exemplified by the movie Defiance in 2002. And our focus tonight will indeed be Hollywood representation. Some cynics quip that there's no business like Shoah business, and even I have been tempted to coin a term like Holocaust. Well, the truth is Nazis have been a staple of Hollywood movies for over 75 years. Their initial incarnations were in B-movies, such as Confessions of a Nazi Spy in 1939 and the underrated None Shall Escape in 1944, or black comedies like The Great Dictator and To Be or Not to Be from 1942, my own personal favorite, and I'm therefore delighted that you're going to get to see that in a few weeks. And you should know that at the time of release, both Charlie Chaplin and Ernst Lubitsch were vilified at the time. These films were not well received during World War II. Increasingly, movies have also been depicting Nazis in prestigious dramas that do address German guilt. One example is Valkyrie from 2008, about the plot of German officers to assassinate Hitler, starring Tom Cruise and General Stauffenberg. So if film genres can be likened to human beings in their evolution from infancy to maturity, Holocaust dramas are perhaps coming of age. It's been 60 years since The Diary of Anne Frank and Judgment at Nuremberg, the first major studio productions on the subject. In the interim, many Holocaust-related motion pictures have brought to this already weighty genre a moral complexity that replaces simplistic categories like Jewish victim or Nazi monsters with a more sophisticated questioning of human behavior in extreme situations. Schindler's List remains an emblem of Hollywood's fascination with stories of wartime evil, struggle, and redemption. But I'm sure that all of you realize there is an inherent tension between commercial films and the Holocaust. Whereas the atrocities of the Shoah yield few neat resolutions that can be fit into a 2-hour package, the nature of narrative in general, and of Holocaust movies in particular, is to be reassuring. By the end of even the darkest of tales, there is somehow the human spirit triumphing, and the historical horror is often sanitized. Take Tomorrow the World from 1944, in which a terrifying 12-year-old Nazi, he comes to the United States to live here with his paternal, his uncle Frederick March. Well, that character, together with his Jewish fiancée, who is a figure of moral authority, they ultimately teach the boy to reject Nazism. You know, we go, yay, happy ending, but how partial that reality was. So let's look at the historical arc of American film representations of the Shoah. I will be showing clips from one film made during World War II, another from the early 1960s, and a third made almost 50 years after the war's end. And in this context, I vigorously recommend that you see the superb documentary Imaginary Witness. It was directed by Danny Anker, released in 2004. It interweaves historical analysis, revealing clips, and vivid interviews with artists, as well as a few scholars like myself. Among those are Steven Spielberg, Sidney Lumet, Rod Steiger. And Anker, he includes cartoons, newsreels, and the crucial role played by American television in our awareness of the Holocaust, including, for example, an extraordinary scene from This Is Your Life, which was really the first reality show back in 1953. Well-intentioned Hollywood films, like those of the 1940s, did not even use the word Jew. If you watch The Mortal Storm from 1940, hey, if you just watch Casablanca, you'll see that you get the euphemism of refugee as opposed to the specificity. This is not surprising, considering the rampant anti-Semitism that existed in the 1930s and 40s in the United States. Jewish studio executives cautiously shied away from depicting Jewish life on screen. Against this backdrop, None Shall Escape is an anomaly. It was directed by André de Toth from a script by Lester Cole, who would later be one of the Hollywood Blacklisted 10, the Hollywood 10. The story, which was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Writing Original Story, is by two men, a German-born novelist named Alfred Newman, and Vienna native Joseph Than. Before coming to the United States, Than wrote and produced Abel Gance's Paradis Perdu in 1939 France, and later he wrote for American TV shows like I Spy and Hollywood 5-0. Shot in 1943 and released in 1944 by Columbia Pictures, None Shall Escape is not only revelatory because it includes a sequence of Nazis killing Jews, but it's also prescient in its depiction of the post-war trial of a fictional SS leader, Wilhelm Grimm. I mean, the Nuremberg trials came a lot later than they were envisioned here. Grimm is played by Alexander Knox, who in the same year starred as the kindly Woodrow Wilson in the film Wilson, for which he earned an Oscar nomination. Grimm is on trial for war crimes. By the way, has anyone here seen None Shall Escape? I'm guessing no, because you have no idea how hard I had to work to be able to get a DVD. It doesn't exist officially. I used a certain black market channel and finally found a wonderful person who had taped it off of TCM and gave me that. So hence there's a clip. Grimm is on trial for war crimes. He chooses to act as his own lawyer. And here's the interesting structure of the film. There are 3 witnesses, and each one engenders a flashback beginning with a priest. In 1919, Lidzbark, Poland, we see his warm relations with the rabbi, whose synagogue is across from the church. Wilhelm returns from World War I, and although he fought alongside the Germans, he's welcomed back to his job as a teacher, and he's embraced by his fiancée Marja, played by Marsha Hunt. Because his leg is wounded, Wilhelm is filled with self-doubt. He reveals a fascist heart, as he has no love for himself or others. Wilhelm asks both the priest and the rabbi for money to return to Germany, and they both give it to him. The second witness is his brother, Karl, whose story picks up Wilhelm's rise to power in Munich with the Nazis. Karl is against the party, but he loves Wilhelm, who then sends his own brother to a concentration camp and takes his nephew Willy under his wing. The third witness is Marja, whose testimony begins in 1939 when she returns to Lidzbark as a widow with a beautiful daughter. Well, Wilhelm has returned to Lidzbark too as a vengeful Nazi leader. For example, he forces the Poles to smile on a food line for a propaganda movie and then removes all the food as soon as the cameras stop. We see in this film a spectrum of response to the Nazis. A doctor is too accommodating. The priest is decent but can't fight Wilhelm head-on. Marja is bold and unsubmissive. One of the high points of None Shall Escape is the last part of Marja's graphic testimony. We see the rabbi trying to stop the burning of the Torahs, to no avail, as the synagogue has been turned into a stable. You're about to see a 4-minute clip from the scene of the Jews rounded up for deportation. And don't forget, this was shot in 43 and released in 44. In 1944, it must have been shocking to see a rabbi exhorting the Jews to fight back. We see how he's able to get up with the help of the priest, and he walks over to a sign. The sign in Polish says uwaga pociąg, which means danger train, but it's in the form of a cross, right? It creates the shadow of a cross too, and that is where he stands to say Kaddish, the prayer for the dead. And the camera shows the pile of corpses under the cross image made by that sign. I don't think this is, quote, Christianizing the victims at all. Rather, it suggests the ineluctable coexistence of the two religions. None Shall Escape has an additional resonance that I have to mention to you. Arthur Miller's first novel, Focus, was published in 1945. When I read it about 14 years ago, I was struck by the scene in which the protagonist goes into a movie theater uncomfortably watching Jews and Nazis on the screen. I got to meet Arthur Miller, and I asked him if the unnamed movie was in fact None Shall Escape. Although he was not sure of the title, no other American film of the early 1940s had this kind of image: anti-Nazi, philo-Semitic, and showing Jews resisting with guns. Refusing the happy end typical of Hollywood movies, None Shall Escape has the kind of grit found in European films of the 1940s. And perhaps this is due to de Toth's background. The director was born in Hungary. He fled to England after World War II began, and then to the United States in 1942. Another émigré director made The Seventh Cross in 1944. How many are familiar with that film? At least a few of you, which is good. Namely, the director is Fred Zinnemann. And this strong anti-Nazi drama, if Hollywood in its conventions, it does include the word Jew. It's set in 1936 Germany, when our hero George, played by Spencer Tracy, embittered by the cruelty that he endured, he finds redemptive behavior in the decency of others. And by the way, in 1936, Spencer Tracy had starred in Fritz Lang's Fury, another drama directed by a German émigré, where the character learns about the darker aspects of human nature before a final turn to forgiveness. After The Seventh Cross, Zinnemann directed The Search. Do you know this? It was released in 1949, and it is the first Hollywood film to deal with the aftermath of World War II, literally the Holocaust. It's very moving and effective in its simplicity, and it was shot in the rubble of the American-occupied zone of Germany. It begins in a transit camp with children who survived the concentration camps. We have this crisp but sympathetic female character played by Aline McMahon. She records each child so that survivors can be found relatives after the war. We meet little Karel Malik. He barely speaks at all. He doesn't say very much. He runs away with a French boy because of the Red Cross ambulance. Why? They know that during the war, this insignia masked mobile gas chambers. Karel meets an American GI, Montgomery Clift, in his first released motion picture, and the GI takes the urchin to his place, realizing that the tattoo on little Karel's arm means that he was interned in Auschwitz. Though he teaches Karel some English, they are unable to speak about Karel's mother, who, unbeknownst to him, also survived the camps and is searching for her son. Their tales converge at the UNRWA camp, United Nations Rescue and Relief, and there the mother works with other children. Although The Search deals much more with child refugees than with Judaism, it's hardly absent. Karel's mother thinks that her son has been found because a choir boy bears his name. But this turns out to be Joel Makowski, a Polish Jewish child who was told by his parents never to reveal his real name. Well, little Joel is seen again at the very end of the film at the UNRWA camp as part of a group of Jewish children going to Palestine. Not only is there a Jewish star on the wall, but each of the children says shalom to Mrs. Malek as they leave. So on the one hand, it is a Hollywood film with melodramatic music, a happy end, a focus on a sympathetic Gentile American soldier rather than on Jewish Holocaust victims. But on the other hand, it looks so real in that actual location with non-professional children and a concern with the cost of war on the most vulnerable population of Europe, the children. Given the proximity in time and place to the Holocaust, The Search has this pungent immediacy. But in every decade, American filmmakers have attempted to tell World War II stories in a fresh manner. For example, The Pawnbroker was emblematic of the early 1960s. How many have seen that one? Okay, we're getting a little warmer here. Each time there's one hand in addition. This is a film that I teach in my classes at Columbia all the time, partly because of the sophisticated editing style. The fragmentary editing expressed the way that survivor Saul Nazarman, brilliantly played by Rod Steiger, deals with the pain of the concentration camp past. In and around his Harlem pawn shop, you get this flash cut, like half a second, then it's 1 second, then it's 2 seconds. It externalizes his unsuccessful attempt to repress involuntary spurts of memory. This is not only true to Saul's psyche, but also reflects an American sensibility that had not yet absorbed the Holocaust. This independently made drama, it turned the wartime past into a palpable intrusion into the protagonist's present. And it expressed his dissociation from those around him. We're going to see a short clip. It's the first time in the film that the editing suddenly makes us aware of what Saul is thinking and feeling as opposed to what he's seeing. But it's what he sees and hears that triggers those involuntary memories. I find this bravura of filmmaking, but not just for the sake of showing off cinematic style. This is a case where the technique expresses the stream of consciousness inside the protagonist's mind. And you see the sort of, the visual rhyme, for example, a fence, a victim, a dog, plus that oral rhyme of the barking that we hear in the present and the past. We realize that there is this connection between what Saul sees and his horror and helplessness in the past. He was the bald man. Condition his helplessness in the present. Throughout the pawnbroker, we see he doesn't feel he can change anything about the sad lives around him. Sidney Lumet ushered into both the American cinema and Holocaust representation a new maturity, nurtured by an independent and very New York sensibility. This was shot entirely in New York. Sidney Lumet, as I'm sure some of you know, was not only a gifted director, he started out as a child actor in Yiddish theater and on a radio show called The Rabbi from Brownsville, and he knew a great deal about this world in the United States, and obviously learned a great deal about their counterparts in Europe. By the late 1970s and 80s, the representation of atrocity became more graphic and pervasive, notably in television miniseries like Holocaust and War and Remembrance. Once the basic facts of Nazi persecution and Jewish victimization were known, once they assumed that celluloid reality, it became possible for films to explore dramatic themes like resistance and rescue, which are foregrounded in films like Valkyrie, Defiance, and of course, Schindler's List. Over 20 years ago, Spielberg's drama became a touchstone of the genre, revealing both the glories and the limitations of Hollywood representation. Frank Rich in the New York Times famously pointed out that the Jews were depicted as background figures relegated to the status of extras in their own drama. I'm not sure I agree. The film's success was largely due to the viewer's ability to identify with a character who moves from indifferent opportunism into heroic action. This narrative strategy is central to most of the strong fiction films on the subject. An audience surrogate, the person we identify with, is unlikely to be a Jew who has been brutalized or a vicious Nazi. Rather, we identify with the decent impulses of the observer. The film was based on the book Thomas Keneally's Schindler's List, which is rooted in interviews with Jewish survivors of the Holocaust who were under the protection of Oskar Schindler. It has less of a traditional dramatic arc. It's an accumulation of testimonies. So Spielberg and the screenwriter Steven Zaillian had to rise to the challenge, focusing the motion picture on an enigmatic German businessman who turned from profiteer to savior during World War II. Released in 1994, it became Spielberg's greatest commercial and critical success, earning Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Director, and commercially, internationally, very, very popular as well. I've watched the films a number of times, each time realizing more and more the skill, the craft that Spielberg brought to this material. And I'm guessing, how many here have seen the film? This will probably get more hands than the others. Yeah, I thought so. It's the opening of the film that I find remarkable in the way that it introduces both the thematic and the stylistic elements that would be developed throughout the film. They basically tell us how to watch the rest of the movie. So we're going to see the opening sequence of Schindler's List. So what have we just seen?
He's sitting down, he's waiting for them to come in.
Not just that. It's like there's a sense of mystery in all of this because, well, first of all, it's that hand that lights a Sabbath candle. You have a sense of ritual, of continuity, as we hear a prayer in Hebrew. And by the way, that is in color. Well, that image of continuity provides the frame of Schindler's List, which is a celebration of the ritual of Judaism. Thank you, actually. This way I can get a little closer to the mic, sorry. The candle burns, suggesting the passage of time, and the smoke denoting its end, well, that becomes the smoke from a train as the film turns into black and white. Color, which is connected to continuity, is then suppressed until the war is over. The film's peaceful and timeless religious opening is immediately juxtaposed with the wartime chaos of the Krakow train station, which is embodied in handheld camera work, where we see the Jews arriving to be herded into the ghetto. Lists of names are being typed. The triadic introductory structure of Schindler's List is going to be rhymed at the end by the triadic concluding structure. It moves from a candle to a list, and finally to a man. But we don't get to see Schindler right away. Spielberg effectively presents details that suggest a mystery. First, we see his hands in close-up as he gets dressed, culminating in the Nazi pin on his lapel. As he enters the nightclub, a handheld camera behind his shoulder, we still don't see him fully. When the camera is finally before his face, his hand hides it. Cinematically speaking, I think that the director establishes that his hero reveals little, especially about motivation. Building on the premise of Zelian's script, in which Schindler is treated from an objective distance, through which we see only external behavior rather than rationale, neither Spielberg's direction nor Liam Neeson's performance neither attempts to penetrate the protagonist's enigmatic nature. This might be a drawback, because after all, we want to understand why did Schindler change from an opportunistic employer of slave labor to a protector. But this is perhaps the only authentic approach, because no one can state with certainty what led this takeover artist to such nobility. The ambiguity of the character is expressed throughout the film by the lighting. During the first hour, many shots present Schindler's face half in light, half in shadow. For example, when he offers Stern, played by Ben Kingsley, a drink for the third time. To see his face half in shadow, at least until he makes a decisive choice, externalizes the possibly dual motive of profiteering and protecting. Finally, the music of the opening evocatively establishes the time and place. The sound bridge from the train to Schindler's apartment is the song Gloomy Sunday, which emanates from his radio, and it was a popular song of the late 1930s that allegedly led people to commit suicide in record numbers. When he enters the nightclub, you hear that Argentine tango, suggesting the upper-class atmosphere of the cafe. This is part of Spielberg's numerous cinematic elements that transform a verbal text into a rich audiovisual experience. When I wrote an article for Newsweek about Holocaust cinema in 2008, I noticed that films representing the Shoah had matured but only within traditional Hollywood assumptions. For example, 4 movies addressing German guilt, while all set in Germany, were in English, and all 4 centered on a male protagonist, even if the reader has a haunting female at the center. As in Sophie's Choice, the woman with a World War II secret is seen only through the perspective of an enamored youth. While Hollywood gender bias might be the reason, box office caution is perhaps more relevant. Except for Valkyrie, they were all adapted from acclaimed novels. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas by John Boyne, The Reader by Bernhard Schlink, and there was also Good, based on the 1981 play by C.P. Taylor. Hollywood has always gambled on films about the Holocaust only after the material has proven its commercial viability in another medium. And these stories, more often than not, are about men and by men. Defiance, adapted from a nonfiction book by Nahama Tek, was the only one of the new films to focus on Jewish heroism. All of these films include at least one audience surrogate, as I call them, a character with whom we wish to identify. And as I said, it is less likely to be a victimized Jew or a Nazi tyrant than someone who grows from cowardice or indifference to heroic action, as Schindler's List demonstrated. But in the 2008 releases, I saw that there was no real catharsis. Whether it's German resistance or Jewish defiance, Hitler is not killed. The good guys, the bad guys really are not vanquished at the end. Rather, we share in the characters' increasing awareness or lucidity. And whereas good and evil were pretty clear in World War II films about espionage and battles, now the viewer must relate to characters who ask, like Kate Winslet's Hannah confronting a judge in The Reader, what would you have done? These are cautionary tales that heighten awareness, and they leave us with questions. How much do we know? How much can we bear to know? And what do we do with the knowledge? There are many other American films to explore in this context, including The Juggler with Kirk Douglas from 1953, Triumph of the Spirit with Willem Dafoe in 1989, and The Music Box with Jessica Lange and Armin Mueller-Stahl, also 89. While it is reductive to generalize about American film representations of the Holocaust, it's really gratifying to study their evolution and to appreciate where we have come from the early films. Thank you. I guess we have time for a few questions that I'm happy to accept. A gentleman in the back and then a gentleman here.
Two things that were mentioned, I think by you, about the failure to fight back was one of the themes. And actually, the failure to fight back is a myth, because Professor Randolph Braham, who's one of the world's authorities on the Holocaust, points out and says, the Jews didn't fight back. If you compare the number of Jews who fought back proportionately with the 2 or 3 million Red Army soldiers who were well-fed and were taken prisoner of war, none of them fought back. The German prisoners of war after the Second World War, you had hundreds of thousands of them guarded by 200 or 300 Allied soldiers, and they didn't resist. So if you then look at those examples where the Jews did fight back, Defiance would be one of them, but there are many other examples of the partisans fighting back and underground. Comparatively speaking, the Jews did fight back. They fought back more than the non-Jews. That's number one. Number two,
did you want me to address that?
Often raised, the question that's raised is, how could people do this to their fellow man? A book was written, The Dawn of Magic. I forget the name of the author. And it points out, if you take a human being and totally dehumanize him, make him into a monster, then when you kill him, you don't think you're killing a fellow human being, you're killing a monster. And that's what the Germans, to a great extent, succeeded in doing vis-a-vis the Jews.
There's no question of what you are saying. The only thing I can add, assuming that I'm supposed to, is that first of all, there have been some extremely fine films made about Jewish resistance. In my class, I show Partisans of Vilna, a superb documentary by Aviva Kempner, where it details the resistance networks, and by the way, the crucial role played by women as well as men in the Jewish resistance. Part of the problem, of course, is that whereas we have chronicles of Jewish victimization by Nazis, especially from the so-called newsreel footage, archival footage taken by primarily German cameras during World War II, we do not have the same records of Jewish resistance. It could not possibly have been documented. And most of the great resistors among the Jews were killed. We therefore do not have access to as many of the stories for dramatization. And your second point is, of course, correct. It's just that that invokes an entire other area of discussion that's separate from American film representation, which is what I think I'm supposed to be addressing. So.
I just wanted to make a comment on Schindler's List, and then I want to ask a question. The opening scene with the smoke going up into the train and the train horn struck me a reminiscence of Lanzmann's. Was he making a reference to that?
No. Both Lanzmann, Claude Lanzmann, who made Shoah, the 9-hour documentary of 1985. And by the way, Lanzmann attacked Spielberg and Schindler's List every chance he got when the film was released. They're both dealing with the source material that we know from World War II, which is trains, smoke. There's a whole sort of syntax of Holocaust representation that we now recognize in films. I mean, my students, when I show them any movie that has a Holocaust context, the minute they see a train, aha. The minute they see smoke, aha. Because we already understand that these are symbols of the deportation and the concentration camps.
And the sound.
And the sound too, absolutely. Absolutely. See, by now, and this is when you start to study the history of Holocaust representation, there are aspects that seemed fresh and unusual perhaps in the late 40s into the 50s, and now they're part of the language of the Holocaust. And they're sometimes even used in films about other oppressed groups. You know, the whole notion of barbed wire and sealed cars and smoke. I mean, we respond to those. In English, when I studied English literature at Queens College, I remember the term synecdoche, and it sounded like Schenectady, that's all I knew. And now I know it's really very simple. A synecdoche is just a part that represents the whole. You know, so like if you see a train in a Holocaust film, you suddenly understand the wider picture. You know, so it's, yeah.
Another comment, and then my question. You mentioned that the film starts in color, and you don't see color again until the war is over.
Except for the little girl in the red coat.
Yes.
But there's so much discussion about that. I didn't want to necessarily jump into it. But there's that added ambiguity. We don't know what we're seeing when suddenly there's color, a little girl in a red coat. And we know that we are seeing from the point of view of Schindler. And it is one of the moments in the film that force us to say, huh? What are we seeing? It's that emphasis I was placing at the end of the lecture on films that raise questions as opposed to providing easy answers.
Now a question. You mentioned that Charlie Chaplin's The Great Dictator and Lubitsch's film met with his favorite. Why?
Well, when Lubitsch's film was released, To Be or Not to Be, some of the critics said that Lubitsch was making fun at the expense of the victims of the Nazis, because it is rather broad farce at times. Well, Mel Brooks, you know, produced the remake of To Be or Not to Be. But you have to understand, the film was released in 1942, we're talking. Also, there's another detail. The star of the film, Carole Lombard, along with Jack Benny, Carole Lombard had just been killed in a plane crash before the film was released. And that cast another pall over. Some of the critics felt that it was too soon, that this, well, you're going to see the film in a few weeks, but the specific line for which Lubitsch was raked over the coals was when Sig Ruman's character, Colonel Earhart, says to Jack Benny, who's this rather dubious Polish actor, that what Benny's character is doing to Shakespeare, we're now doing to Poland. That was considered in poor taste. But years, decades later, after Hogan's Heroes make bumbling Nazis a prototype of television culture, everybody realized that this was like a classic film that was a merciless satire of Nazism and of the Nazis' need to always be beholden to their superiors. Orders. I'm just following orders. I have to be, orders. I thought that was fantastic, but then again, I wasn't in America in 1942. And by the way, Chaplin's The Great Dictator was banned in many cities that had German populations, large German-American populations. Chaplin was accused, quote, of being Jewish. I mean, the propaganda against him was, sure, he makes The Great Dictator, he's Jewish. And his response when asked about that was, I'm sorry, but I don't have that honor. A very dignified way to establish the reality of it.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Didn't Hitchcock do any documentary on?
Yes.
It was on. They said something about him.
Yeah, absolutely. It's for those of you who are interested in Alfred Hitchcock, and any self-respecting film student should be. At the end of World War II, he was approached to edit into a documentary film, footage from the Nazi concentration camps. And what he created, which was called Memory of the Camps, he was like, helping to put it all together, was deemed so gruesome that it was not shown for about 50 years. It was a fantastic documentary that aired on HBO about a year or two ago. I just blanked on the title.
It was on Channel 13 too, PBS.
Yeah, forgive me. Night Will Fall. Night Will Fall was about the effort to make and finally release the footage that Hitchcock had a hand in. And his main role, according to this documentary, was he insisted, and this is somebody who, for example, in Psycho's shower sequence depended a great deal on montage, on editing, cut, cut, cut. What he insisted upon was that the documentary had to show how close in space the concentration camps were to the local populations. He said, you can't let anyone off the hook by suggesting that it was miles and miles away. It was right there in their own backyard. So he wanted to make sure that there were panning movements that showed how close the space was.
I know it's not your topic for tonight, but I just wonder, and I'm sure you know, what films were made in Germany?
Germany has been making so many Holocaust-related films. I watched one a few nights ago. It was made at least 6-7 years ago. It is called My Führer by Donny Levy. And I'm not kidding, what a great double bill with To Be or Not to Be. It's about a Jewish actor who is who's taken out of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp to train the Führer for a speech that he's supposed to make in 1944. It is merciless satire. It is very funny. It is in ridiculously bad taste, and it works. This is typical of some of the German films. They've also been making straightforward dramas that acknowledge German culpability during World War II. There have been many films made by children of survivors, in the United States, films made by children of survivors and now grandchildren. In Germany, made by children and grandchildren of Nazis. because there was a kind of collective amnesia after World War II. Anyway, a great example, the German entry for the Best Foreign Language Film Oscar a few months ago, it didn't make it into the top 5, but I think it was shortlisted in the 9 or something, was called Labyrinth of Lies. It is set in Germany in the late 50s, and it deals with a true story, the Frankfurt trials. It's such an interesting, brave, absorbing drama about real people and circumstances, forcing German audiences to own up to their past.
We have time for one more question. If there was any of the students in the room who wanted to
ask about movie technique or anything.
Anything?
There's a woman here.
The film Life Can Be Beautiful.
Life is beautiful, yeah.
Has been criticized by people I know who are survivors as trivializing their experiences and the experience in the film. What is your opinion?
When I first saw Life is Beautiful at the Cannes Film Festival, my feeling was this is not a Holocaust film. It's a fairy tale that acknowledges from the very first shot that it's, you know, it's in a fairy tale universe where the Benigni character will do anything in the first half to get the love of that school teacher, Dora. And similarly, when the film relocates in the second half to an unnamed concentration camp, he will do anything to protect his child. But it is so blatantly unreal, everything in the film, including the so-called concentration camp. Of course, there was never a camp where a prisoner could grab the, you know, speaker, the loudspeaker. Of course, I mean, I think it was a fallacy for anyone to assume that Benigni was working in a realistic mode, especially because the film articulated from the outer frame at the beginning, this is a fairy tale. It's a film about love, and the extent to which a brave, foolish, noble fellow will go for the love of the woman in the first half and the love of his son in the second. And I credited the film because a really cheaper version would have had the Benigni character survive. He does die. And even though there's a muted happy ending because the child and the mother do survive, it's not your basic cheap Hollywood film. Now, I'm saying all of this as a devil's advocate, because when the film first came out, it was attacked right and left, and I chose to defend it because of that. But when I'm in a room with people who absolutely adore this film and say it's the best Holocaust movie ever made, I go, whoa, 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 pull back a little. I say, A, it's not a Holocaust film. B, it's a great movie in the terms Benigni set out for it. By the way, Benigni, when I interviewed him, made it very clear to me that his inspiration primary was The Great Dictator. He said that he even took the same number that was on the Jewish barber's concentration camp uniform and used that number for the character in Life is Beautiful. So there's a direct continuity from Chaplin to Benigni. They're not necessarily making Holocaust art or even illuminating the Holocaust. They're using the Holocaust backdrop to make films about what they care for in this world, which has to do with making loving connections to other people.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe now we have a student. I'm sorry, we're going to go with new questioners, and this has to be the last one, but
Yeah, because I've got a car coming.
We have a couple more minutes, yes.
So, would you might be able to kind of conceptualize movies that are more contemporary for the younger audience? Because I noticed that a lot of the movies that you showed are clips from a lot of classics that might be hard to get. And I noticed, like,
The Pawnbroker you can get easily in Schindler's List too. It's only None Shall Escape that is virtually impossible. No, but I'm happy to continue.
oh, well, yeah, I noticed like one of the movies that are somewhat contemporary comes out of the comic book, and so they make this movie with Captain America, and he's fighting in Germany.
I'll go you one better. X-Men. X-Men literally uses the Holocaust as the background frame. It's in 2 of the X-Men films, and I was stunned when I finally caught up with them on DVD because I didn't know. I don't watch X-Men and Captain America necessarily, you know. Sometimes when I'm, shall we say, slumming. But X-Men clearly delineates that the character who becomes Magneto, Ian McKellen's character, survived the concentration camp and watched his mother being taken away. And we are led to understand that that is the psychological basis for what he becomes as a man. So that's another example where the Holocaust is invoked and maybe used in something beyond its own reality to explain a character in another world. I thought you were going to take me to Inglourious Bastards.
Actually, I was, but I changed because...
Thank you. No, I mean, because basically, Inglourious Bastards, I find it a very entertaining movie. It's very well made. It has nothing to do with the Holocaust. But it did get people thinking and talking about Jews who fight back, so hey, why not?
All right, thank you. Now you all see that I didn't oversell anything. In fact, I undersold. Thank you all for joining us. Like I mentioned, the catalogs are standing outside on the table. They're not standing, they're laying. And Allison and Marissa from my staff are there with an iPad if you wanted to help us out with the donation or renew your membership. And otherwise, please come back again. Thank you all for coming.